Assalamu alaikum, members, and good morning. Welcome to another amazing technical workshop. It's going to be presented to us by Dr. Nihal Al-Sabbagh, founder and design director of Environas. And it's going to be specifically on microclimatic assessment and urban spaces. So, Dr. Nihal, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you, everyone, for being here, showing up in the morning. Good morning. So I'm Dr. Nihal Al-Sabbagh, the founder and design director of Environas. I will introduce everything that I do and take you in a very interesting session today, talking about microclimatic assessment and urban spaces. So today I'm going to discuss what the urban community means. I will touch on scales of urban spaces and the notion of designing for people, which is a very hot topic that is taking over in many cities across the world. I will also define the notion of micromobility and walkability and touch on that particularly in hot cities, and also showcase how we used environmental data to be able to develop our projects in guiding the design for walkability. I will, last but not least, end with one of the case studies that we have worked in at Environas. So at Environas, we have a vision and a mission, which is sustainability at every space. And when I say every space, that means outdoor spaces, indoor spaces. So we do multiple services that has got to do with design and assessment. But the way how we envision sustainability is embedded within the people, the attributes of the physical environment as well, and how they integrate together. We have three sets of services at Environas, one of which is environmental design. We do conduct architectural design, urban design, interior and landscape, and that is all based on the fundamentals and parameters of environmental, the environmental pillars that is needed. We do integrate sustainability measures that touches also on economical and social aspects. We conduct environmental assessments such as energy modeling, lighting assessments, post-occupancy evaluation, and microclimatic analysis, which is what we are going to elaborate on today. We also do life cycle assessments and environmental impact assessments. We have multiple partnerships with other entities in the UAE and in Egypt that also assists us with taking different scales of projects. We believe so much in research, internally and externally, so all our designs and environmental assessments are based on research. And when we say that, we conduct our own research. Myself, as an academic, I do conduct a lot of research in multiple environments and do integrate that into the assessment and environmental design services. Today, I'm going to touch on that in multiple points that I will take you through, and how through the research I was able to personally at Environas conduct an assessment services and be able to derive from that design solution. So let's start on the urban community. What is the urban community? So I think when we say community, there is the physical side of it, and there is also the social side of it. So there are tangible parameters, there are intangible parameters. But when we say urban communities, what is it that we are looking for? Are we looking for connected facilities? Are we looking for walkable infrastructure, safe environments, human scale public realm, as well as conducive spaces, attractive spaces, and pleasant weather? I think if we stop at each keyword, we would be able to integrate all of these pillars into what defines the urban community. So sometimes we do see, and I think many of us have experienced that, whether in the UAE or across other countries, that we do live in urban areas but not urban communities. And when I say urban communities, it means that the intangible part, which is the social interaction between people, the other dimensions are not there. What creates these conducive spaces, such as walkability, such as interaction, is the connected facilities, for example. What gives you this sense of belonging to this particular space comes from also the notion of safety, whether it's a family oriented, whether it's more of individual livings. Of course, the case for Masdar City is a very early starter on that particular notion, where car-free routes were designed at a very early stage with sustainable mobility modes to be able to transport people between different points within the urban area through other modes than cars or electrical cars, as well as walkable infrastructure. When I say that, the case study has been able to look into multiple dimensions, such as shade, such as ventilation, and other aspects. So when we look at the urban community in Masdar City, if we start analyzing that, what brings everything or connects everything to the notion of car-free routes? We have residential areas, we have commercial areas that would be able to attract people to move between one point and another. We have public spaces, which is where people are moving and interacting. We have community facilities, and that is again very important for the connectivity of the urban area. We have mobility and transportation, and I think it was one of the very early case studies that touched on that, again, on sustainable transport. The infrastructure there is very important. So it's another component that is very essential to be able to define an urban community or a successful urban community. That is all, of course, under the umbrella of governance and safety, to be able to develop that and take it to the next level where social interaction is happening. The economical and employment zones, we have environmental and ecological feature, as well as cultural identity and aesthetics. When we see that, we can see that I don't know how many of us here are involved in the design industry, but the way how these urban areas are developed is through layers. So we do design the physical entity, and usually successful entities or like designers and architects who are involved, multiple stakeholders in the project, they try to bring in as much as possible at an early stage in the project what these intangible measures are. So we hear a lot in multiple projects about the human-centric urban environments and how to bring in a new idea to be able to design the infrastructure where people are able to move between one point and another, and how they are able to see, interact with the streets, the greenery, the scenery, the safety, and so on and so forth. So before I start, I want to ask whoever is here to know the audience. I want to name a friendly urban community. If you can open your mics or write it in the chat box, and Lana can pass it over. Can anyone define or like name an urban community and what makes it friendly?
And just to clarify, all of you members have access to your cameras and your mics. So please go ahead, either in the chat box, as Dr. Nihal said, or you can just share with us openly here.
Even if it's going to be critical, like where you are actually living.
In Dubai, I think the most friendly environment is Springs, in my opinion, because it is walkable, even though it's very, very hot still. But still, the design is not allowing really real interaction between the neighbors. If there was more shaded areas than open areas, even though it's all green, and the multi-birds and environment, natural environment around is very like connecting to the environment. So that's my opinion. And also the old town in downtown,
Yeah.
which is because it is canvas planning and there is a lot of water features and low rise buildings with more natural material and clay like and all vernacular and domes and also a lot of pigeons and doves that is filling the sound of the space. So the sound is making the sound of water in the space and all this and completely shaded. So as a direct neighborhood, it is connecting in a way. Yeah, so that's my opinion.
Thank you very much. Yeah, two very good examples, which is Springs and downtown. And you mentioned that it's a human scale, it's walkable, it's connected. However, it's hot, which is something that we are going to touch on today. And so probably it's friendly. It's a friendly environment. Any other case studies? Any other examples? I can see we have a lot of members here.
Yeah, one also added Expo City.
Expo City. Interesting. What makes Expo City friendly? If you can open your mic and
Yes.
yeah,
Am I audible? Okay, fantastic. So, I think in Expo City you have like the only method of transportation inside the city is to use like an e-scooter or a bike that can get you like from any location to another, which makes it a lot easier than having, I mean, vehicles on the road, and it's way more friendly to have a walk around. So I think that that's the point I would like to share.
it's very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much. Expo City is one of the car-free areas. Uh, I think the live interactions or events that is taking place and connecting the different areas of the city. However, this is being deprived or like challenged very much during hot times of the year. And we are going to touch on that again today. Okay, so I highlighted three urban communities, one of which is Greens, Jumeirah Beach residents, and downtown. And the three examples are totally different compared to each other. Greens is a residential area. It does not focus on commercial facilities. However, it has a few amenities there. So it has a school, it has a market, it has a mosque, and so on and so forth. However, if we would rate or look at the infrastructure or the design of the infrastructure, it's very successful in terms of height to width ratio, in terms of shading, in terms of greenery, and so on and so forth. But do people actually move? Do people actually walk or use scooters and bikes? And for how long? The Jumeirah Beach residence, on the contrary, is a little bit different. It's that the human scale there is different compared to downtown and Greens. And when we say that, it's still very live, the infrastructure is very live. And the reason for that is the presence of the facilities and the amenities. So the commercial facilities that is there is actually responsible for attracting too much people inside the space. So it would be reviving the walkability very much, despite the fact of the lack of shade or the lack of urban ventilation, which is a little bit different compared to Greens. If we look at downtown area, which is one of the case studies that is highlighted, it's very interesting. It's connected, not as connected as Greens because it's a larger urban area. It has a mixture of commercial and urban commercial facilities as well as other type of amenities that makes people move between one point and another. The public transportation is very important because it's also responsible for reviving these outdoor communities, and the existence of public transport, of course, in Jumeirah Beach residents and downtown is different compared to Greens. And I don't know how many of you have been living in the UAE. How many of you have been living in the UAE before the metro station has opened? And if you have actually experienced the shift that happen to multiple communities and the amount of walkability that has been enhanced after the metro station has been introduced. And that touches on the urban connectivity very much and makes people walk. In this diagram, I have worked previously in multiple publications on classifying the weather conditions in the UAE. So the way how I look into the climate of the UAE is into 3 seasons, one of which is the hot season. And of course, that's between May and October. When we say that, we exclude the late times of the evening or early mornings, but during most of the day, the infrastructure is quite hot. Other times of the year, which is usually in April and November, these periods, we call them as warm periods. And the reason is you can walk, you can go outdoor, but it really depends on the infrastructure. If there is greenery, if there is shading, how long are you walking, until when, what time of the day is it? So that is a little bit depending on all these factors that I've mentioned. The other part of the year, which is the mild period, which is December to March, is the period when the weather is very pleasant and everyone can go outdoor without thinking much about the climatic conditions. And if we look at this analysis or classification, we would be able to locally benchmark the walkability for the UAE. So I wouldn't compare the amount of people walking in outdoor streets to other case studies. We would benchmark it according to the mild period. So if we want to know the maximum capacity of these spaces where people are able to walk and the climate is not depriving them. So if we want to really analyze the connectivity and human scale and other parameters and exclude the climate from that particular equation, we would look into the mild period. And this is the way how we look at the analysis of the infrastructure. So we compare the mild period and we try to extend the walkability during these months to the warm period and the hot period. So if we were able to add cooling interventions, if we are experiencing the infrastructure and we are able to walk in April and in May, have a look at the space. Why am I here at this time? And what is this infrastructure doing? Or is it actually, contributing back to the pleasantness of the weather conditions? And this is why I'm able to interact in the outdoor spaces and walk. When I say that, there is a lot of parameters. It brings a lot of parameters and multi-scales. So the way how we design cities again, and the way how we design urban areas is a little bit holistic. So when we say at Environas, for example, when we receive these projects at a larger scale and we are required to look at the massive master plan, how we would zoom in and be able to design for people. So we still do take into consideration these small parameters that we have mentioned and how much they would influence the main infrastructure, which is the master plan. It's a mix of attributes. There's a lot of parameters that plays a role there, but to simplify things, I would say the heat balance of an urban space is all about the time of exposure. So if we go back to this climatic analysis, how long has been this particular space exposed to the heat? And of course, the materiality there is very important. How much has it been able to absorb the heat? And is there urban ventilation? And the reason why I say that is even when we look at the warm period in April, you could walk in the spaces in the evening and they're still hot. So they are not conducive. So you are still bothered whether it's by the heat or the humidity levels. And the reason for that is the heat balance parameters that gets into that, which is the time of heat exposure, whether this space was able to breathe and release back the heat that has been accumulated during the time of solar radiation, depending, of course, on the enclosure. When I touch on that, there are a lot of parameters that plays role. Because sometimes when we overshade spaces, like this space, for example, I don't know if you can see my cursor or my mouse, the space on the right bottom, which is full of trees, this space did not, we conducted, or I conducted a lot of measurements in multiple spaces. And when I look at this particular space, I realized that it's not always pleasant. So it wasn't always cooler. Why? Because the ventilation has been blocked. There was not enough airflow to release or reduce the sensation of humidity that has been caused. So the solar radiation has been removed. However, the humidity was there. But this space performed very well, for example, during later times of the day. So when the solar radiation was not there. So this space would probably be cooler. It's a very good strategy to cool a space that will be used not necessarily during midday, but even during the evening. During midday at high humidity levels, it did not perform well, but during other times of the day. So when we look at that, when I touch on that, it's very important to look at the time of the day that there is a flow of pedestrians between one point and another. The time of the day, when I say that, these routes are being analyzed. So when we look at the master plan, we look at these routes and what are they connecting. So if they are connecting a school, for example, and a metro station, or a school and residences. So you can see people walking, so you would automatically identify that the needed strategy for ventilation and shading would be to cool the morning or the daytime and the afternoon if parents are coming to pick up their kids or are dropping their kids to school and so on and so forth. I would touch on the parameters. So now we understand that the complexity of the urban space and how it performs depends on the heat balance, which is a mixture between a lot of things, but also the human parameter. So we could analyze this and how much is it influencing the human parameter, which is the thermal comfort measures. And when I say thermal comfort factors are three. They are physiological, environmental, and psychological. The environmental parameters are usually controlled through the heat balance equations or the heat balance parameters that I just mentioned. So these are usually measured or simulated, and then we integrate them with the physiological factors such as age, gender, uh, and so on and so forth. The clothing is very important, the met, the speed. Are you walking to work or are you walking for leisure? Is it the case study for Greens or is it the case study for downtown? Are we talking about walking in Springs? So this plays a large role.
Dr. Nihal?
I think our video got stuck. Let me give you a call.
Sure.
Hello. Yeah.
Welcome back.
My connection, yeah, fell off. Okay. So back to the notions of thermal comfort. The physiological, again, it's the clothing, it's the type of trip, whether they are leisure or utilitarian trips. This is how also we analyze and we work on developing codes for master plans to be able to identify that. So we do take into consideration these small differences. The psychological is very important. And one of my early researches that I've worked on, I realized that it has a large potential for boosting thermal comfort in outdoor spaces in the UAE. So we came up with an idea that I realized that these particular spaces, as we walk, I would always give an example of walking in an outdoor space in the UAE and then coming into the building. So the moment the door opens and then you walk into the indoor space and there is this sudden heat stress relief. So this actually boosts your thermal comfort, your psychological acceptance for this particular space. So if we look at that in the outdoor spaces, the successive changes that is happening along the route is mild or is minor. And the reason for that is you are in an outdoor space that is not very controlled. So even if you provide shade, so the difference between one space and another wouldn't be much. But that is not always the case. Sometimes we do have large differences, thermal variations between one space and another. So these mixes of sun and shade, when we analyze them, we realize that the presence of actually lack of shade, sunny spaces, is actually healthy because pedestrians are experiencing the outdoor spaces, and monotonous or continuous shade that is being provided is not only inefficient for like over greening and over providing materials for shading measures and so on, but the presence of these sunny and hot points along the route was very useful for boosting their psychological influence and their overall acceptance to the route. And when I say that, when we analyze the pedestrian's comfort, we look at the overall rating. So you walked along the space, you experienced successive changes, your overall experience. The next day you would say, I will never walk again. So this overall experience along these successive changes is what makes this route, I would call it comfortable or pedestrian friendly versus another space that is not pedestrian friendly. And this is how we look at designing for people. So how did you perceive by the end of the time, or the users in this particular space or urban community perceive? So I wouldn't touch much, but the same sequence of spaces have been analyzed in multiple communities, which I don't want to get into now. During the mild period, the warm period, the hot period. So whenever we look at the mild period, we know that the results will be great, even if there is sunny routes or there is a lack of shade. The warm period is a little bit subjective. So depending on that particular infrastructure, what is being presented there will be able to influence a person's overall comfort. And the hot period, of course, is very challenging because we want to extend when we call a year-round walkable spaces, and that is something that many urban communities in the UAE are targeting now. So we want to create in this challenging conditions above 40 degrees Celsius, but we still want to create walkable communities that where you are able to enjoy the infrastructure even during the hot period. Is that possible? So if we don't do the breakdown and we focus on these particular we call them comfort declining zones, and be able to provide solutions for them, we will not be able to look at that. Areas with lack of shade and lack of ventilation are considered comfort declining zones, but the way how we look at comfort declining zones, it is the threshold of thermal comfort or pedestrian's comfort when along your route, you would say, this is too much. This is too hot. I'm not going to walk again. Or you would decide that this particular journey or experience has been recorded in your brain, that you are no longer seeing or perceiving this particular environment as pedestrian friendly. So these comfort declining zones are a mix of physical attributes, environmental parameters, but also integrates the physiological and psychological parameters. Sometimes identified as hotspots in microclimatic assessments, but the way how we conduct microclimatic assessments for master plans on a larger scale are not necessarily integrating these, interpretations for pedestrians' perception. From these data sets that have been conducted, so we had an experiment conducted on multiple individuals along the year in the UAE during the mild period, the warm period, and the hot period. So we wanted to know how much can people walk? How much can people walk comfortably to be able to identify this threshold that I'm talking about? No, now it's too hot. I will not be able, or it's too hot, but I'd rather have some fresh breeze, or I'd rather have some shade. So this experiment was conducted for a sunny route under the lack of shade, people moving between the indoor and the outdoor. I'll touch on that, and I'll try to speed up a little bit. One of the very significant things that is responsible for comfort drop in the UAE is the shift between the indoor and the outdoor during the warm period and during the mild period, because buildings are set for, a very low set points. And when you are in a building indoor and it's 22 degrees Celsius, or it's 20, or it's 21, and you move to the outdoor, which is actually 25, and that's not bad, or it's 26, or it's 27. I wouldn't say that's in terms of air temperature. That is not so bad, but this large thermal difference is responsible for deferring your comfort. So at the beginning of your journey, you have already started with a much lower acceptance for this particular route or journey. So when we look at that, we look at this particular transition because we realize that it is responsible for deferring people's comfort along or in walkability in urban communities in general. And when I say that, of course, I'm not saying that we need to reduce the air conditioning during the hot period or anything like that, but there is no reason for the mild period and the warm period, which many buildings are still operating this way. And then we tried to extend that. We looked at the step transitions, which is the increase in the thermal sensation. We compared thermal sensation to thermal comfort, and there is a little bit of a difference because the thermal comfort integrates more of psychological measures than the thermal sensation, because thermal sensation is just about how you feel at that particular space. And then we induced ventilation, airflow, as well as shade at one point. From this particular set of data, I have been able to conduct and take that and develop a dynamic agent-based simulation model using Grasshopper, where we started looking in an urban community for the motion of people. So we built an urban area, and in that particular area, we had some, shade, trees, water bodies, and so on. And people were required, and we induced we induced the motion of people inside this space and started monitoring the data from that. The interesting part is that we could actually set the parameters that we want to insert for these particular agents to be able to move inside the urban area. And one of which is the spaces of interest, which touches again on the notion that in urban communities, yes, climate is very important, the weather conditions are very important, but they are not the only controlling parameter. Commercial facilities, commercial activities, connectivity is very important. And you can see that happening in other urban areas like JBR, for example, even when the weather conditions is much hot or warm compared to other areas. So we could design these attractors where people are obliged to move between one point and another. So they are obliged to move to this space. So at that particular route, we would be observing their thermal comfort. The personal template is because it's very challenging when we say designing for people, it's between the standardization or like the mass design and the customization. So we want to look at specific measures. So we want to provide unique comfort measures for each and every user in that particular space. But again, we are obliged to follow the majority of people. So, and this brings us back to the challenge that is there in the UAE. You have a large diversity of backgrounds, and that is very challenging with a large diversity of clothing. Some people have very high expectations regarding the thermal environment. Some others have very low, depending on the thermal history that you are coming from. So all of these parameters are very important. We coded them and then we integrated them into the agent-based simulation model and observing what happens along the successive changes. So that the reason why we did that, we are developing currently something called a thermal credit system. And a thermal credit system is simply, it is the charge or that particular reservoir that we have as users when we access the urban environments, how much this varies between one person and another, and depending on the clothing, and how much are we able to walk and move between the spaces comfortably, and what is the threshold in that particular journey that would defer us from walking during that particular time or even during other times of the day. So when we look at the indoor environment, and again, touching on the shift between the indoor and the outdoor is very important in deferring comfort, passing through the successive changes, and then how hot are you able to get, and then how hot would you stay. So it also influences how much time and thermal differential do you need to cool down. And that brings us to the notion where mechanically cooled spaces are coming essential for these particular routes. So if you get very hot and you're able to walk for like another 5 minutes in a very hot condition or a sunny space, for example, even if we are able to provide a infrastructure with greenery and vegetation, that would not be able to improve comfort. So these comfort declining zones, as we speak, the areas that comes after that, how are we going to design them, and would they actually influence pedestrian comfort positively? So the thermal credit system includes this accumulative measurements, and it takes into consideration all the parameters that we are talking about, including the skin wettedness and the metabolic rates and stuff like that. So the whole purpose is where to add the cooling intervention, at which point, and would it actually be able to boost the thermal comfort after that. This brings us to the idea of course, it's a 15-minute city span, 15-minute walk span, so radius. And that particular radius, we started looking at it, how many individuals based on the actual sample of population, would they be exposed to heat? Would they be exposed to better cooling measures? The whole purpose is to provide the customized solution, again, as we mentioned, and how much does it require that particular cooling. So this is a sample of the agents that have been induced using a crowd simulation inside the urban area, moving between the different patterns, moving between the different outdoor spaces. And when I mention that, it's again the shade of the building, it's the shade of the infrastructure, it's thermal attractors. So the whole purpose is to be able to guide. Maybe at one point we would have one route that is very efficiently designed, even if it has a mechanical cooling intervention. And we would guide, or could we actually attract users or pedestrians to walk from that particular route in that part of the year instead of using the rest of the infrastructure? Because when we conducted a lot of surveys on ground, we realized that people are walking between the shorter distances. So despite the fact of shade, despite the influence on the psychology and everything there, unless you are going for a leisure walk, you would still be able to, you know, choose the shorter route or shorter distance. So this is again the set of presets and input data sets that we used. And this is how we define them and name them. I don't want to touch much because I want to leave room for Q&A. And of course, we started questioning the existing green guidelines that are there. So the existing green guidelines, such as Stadama, such as Mustadam, such as Active Score, and so on and so forth, they give you the shading or the cooling spots that is required at a 100 meter, 150, and 200 meters between one point and another. However, they are differentiated. So if you are providing a cycling infrastructure, so the span is 1,500, for example, meters. So these are the stops. And regarding the interventions for greenery, so that is at a 100. For the pedestrian stops, it's a 150. So they are separated. So they are left to the designer or the architect, master planner, and so on, to be able to overlay these data and these numerical values to design what we designed as we call them recovery venues. So the recovery venues we proposed that in COP27. So we had a winning proposal in COP27, which was in Sharm el-Sheikh, where we designed collectively all of these aspects. So we imagined immersive spaces in hot environments that you would walk into, and they have all the water features, the breeze, the birds, and that is to boost the psychological parameter in comfort and be able to provide people with longer walkable durations. I will touch on the last, which is the case study for the micromobility and walkability analysis, where we worked with mobility experts, Systematica, for Jeddah, to be able to improve the infrastructure. So we were able to provide a microclimatic analysis for the urban streets. The project touches on multi-scalar modes, sustainable transport modes. So it integrates buses, it integrates cars, infrastructure, public networks, of course, as well as micromobility active modes such as scooters, bicycles, as well as walkability and pedestrians. And of course, during to the hot weather conditions, again, the way how we deal with the infrastructure is very important. So the modes mobility strategies needed for the soft modes was considered as the last mile solution. So after you get on your bus, after you get on the metro station and be able to reach your destination, there is always this patch that is very important to be able to connect you to your destination. How is this patch designed and how much can we increase that as well? So we dealt with the whole master plan where, we dealt with the whole master plan and tried to analyze it again in terms of static and dynamic. So again, the dynamic comfort is very important where people are moving. When we look at the thermal maps or the heat maps, which we usually generate in a lot of microclimatic assessment analysis, sometimes they are required, so we do submit them, but I'm not personally very fond of them because they are static. So they do not represent how do you see this particular space as you move between multiple spaces. The comfort range as well. So the comfort area that is critical for us to deal with is between March and November, and we have a potential for improving outdoor micromobility between March, April, and November, avoiding May and October. When we deal with the very hot period in actual projects, we have to identify heat stress levels because the heat stress levels are, apart from the thermal comfort, they are very critical for improving walkability, and you don't want people to actually, get heat strokes or anything there. So for the whole master plans, we conducted the solar exposure as well as the shading analysis for the massing at a very early stage. The project is finished, but these are the very early stage studies. And when we conduct that, we identify the overheating zones and the areas where no further interventions are needed. And when we analyze that, it's very important to identify the type of shade that does not deprive ventilation, because ventilation is very important in high humidity areas, which is also similar to the UAE. And then again, we looked at the breakdown, the thermal comfort and the thermal sensation, and we started designing interventions and shading pathways for the trees. We looked at 4 cross sections for the urban streets. And when we look at this cross section, it's very important that we started breaking it down and looked at the sidewalk. So the height to width ratio is very challenging. So when we dealt with this particular project at a larger scale, from an overview scale, it gave us a results that is completely different when we zoomed in at a pedestrian level. And that is because the cross section for pedestrians, depending on the mild side, as Systematica has a few studies in that particular track, take a walk on the mild side. So depending on the time of the day, the time of the year, shade would be provided on one side of the street. So again, generically speaking, it would not work if we are trying to deal with the whole cross section of the street. Urban greening was very important, but ventilation again was critical, and we were able to analyze the ventilation penetration between the buildings to be able to provide these repetitive urban ventilation and cooling along the sidewalk. We looked at the connectivity with the public transport, such as the metro stations and the bus stations. And I think the idea of the bus stations, this could take another discussion. The idea of the bus station, the air-conditioned controlled bus stations in the UAE, they work for some times of the year. They're not very conducive for many people during other times of the year. But so what is it that is required there? So we looked at these and considered them as transitional spaces that provide mediation between the indoor and the outdoor. So we need to avoid the shift or the large thermal variation between the air-conditioned environment and the weather conditioned in the outdoor, which is also very similar to the climatic conditions of Jeddah. And then we came up with a set of strategies that is required for north-south north-south oriented streets, east-west, depending on the ventilation. And so it's greenery, which is grass. It usually performs very well in multiple conditions. However, it consumes a lot of water, so we're not very fond of large patches of grass. Albedo or the materiality used for sidewalks is very challenging. The higher you go for a better thermal performance, the larger the cost becomes. And this is a challenge that we always face with the clients. So if we go for grass, it's the water consumption that is the problem. If we go for higher materiality, the cost is again the challenge. So we looked into all of these in the set of recommendations that we provided. The type of shading is also important because usually palm trees are used, especially in downtown area, for example. So palm trees is beautiful. They have a very good appeal, and they emphasize on the cultural aspect of, I would say, Gulf cities in general as well. In that particular sense, do they provide shade? They're very poor in providing shade. They have a very good looking, they provide beauty in the outdoor space and so on. So we were trying to avoid palm trees. Also the water consumption that it provides. We looked at the materiality of the buildings as well. And the horizontal and vertical shades. So also the horizontal and vertical shades that is being provided by the adjacent buildings is very important to be able to maximize that and benefit from that for shading the sidewalks. And then we conducted this, thorough analysis over the whole master plan, despite the connectivity and the facility, which was integrated at a later stage. I will not be able to show that, unfortunately, at a later stage with the other stakeholders in the project. So this is the same, the shade and ventilation. So in conclusion, I think we still have, I hope more than 5 minutes to take questions and answers, but I wanted to summarize from all of the research, assessment, and design ideas that I have displayed. What is the summary for conducting the climatic and microclimatic assessments for urban areas? So I would say that it's very important to conduct microclimatic assessments using local data. So find the sources, look for reliable sources for climate data. Climate data is not what is there on ground, so be critical with that. Existing research or measured data usually bridges this notion. So, because there are discrepancies with more than 5 degrees Celsius and wind speeds and so on. So, try to bridge that, conduct a climatic classification. So, it's very important to understand in any of the cities that we worked with, what is the climate classification when we deal with pedestrians or when we deal with designing cities for people. How do we bridge these climate classified based on the human perception? The environmental analysis for the master plans, what are the main components that we are using now? So is it greenery? Do we have water bodies? Is the humidity levels high? Where do we put that with the urban ventilation? Of course, the passive strategy measures, if you do understand that. If not, there are a lot of very interesting references out there that would help you be able to kind of provide the environmental zoning that we call based on the assets that you have. The building density and building heights is very important because one of the best shading performances is building shade. So there is no horizontal obstruction for the heat balance that is happening at a lower scale inside the space. So in the nighttime, there is a night flush or ventilation that is happening, and so on and so forth. The influence of the surrounding area is very important. Some urban communities, I think they perform differently compared to now, compared to 10 years ago, because the adjacent areas were deserted. So is there a wind that is coming from that particular direction that is bringing the dust? And that is a problem that could stay in some urban areas for more than 5 to 10 years. And sometimes the adjacent urban areas with the density and the typology of it is actually bringing a better influence on your particular uh, urban uh, urban community. The microclimate typology, topography and orientation, which is the final part, it's how you would be assessing these particular parameters. So after you gather the data and conduct all of that, how you would put that to be able to analyze the wind. The solar exposure studies are very important. Massing and shading analysis is also very important. Identify potentials for greenery. Again, be very critical with the type of greenery that we're talking about. The grass, it performs very well, but by the end of the time, sometimes we come up with a set of recommendations that are not highly appreciated, especially with real estate developers, because their decisions there are in many cases based on cost. So this is something that they would not go for, and then conduct a temporal spatial analysis based on the usability of the outdoor spaces. So I would say no generic analysis that would be required. The activity schedule for that particular zone is very important. And we have conducted that with the public transport and mobility. And here is the list of recommendations to things that you would be coming up from conducting a climatic and microclimatic analysis at an early stage. We have been discussing this. It's very important study to conduct before we actually proceed into it during the pre-planning. And unfortunately, it's not always conducted and appreciated in many projects across the MENA region. So this is something that we always discuss and bring on the table with our clients. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nihal. I know it's supposed to be ending at 12. I mean, if any of you have a quick question that Dr. Nihal can answer also very quickly, please do add it. We have 2 questions, Dr. Nihal. Do you want me to read them for you quickly?
Yes, please.
So the first one is from Dr. Iman. She asks or wonders, why are we not analyzing and upgrading natural ways of airflow and heat release methods gained from local traditional to an area of planning and designing units themselves and sticking to perpendicular planning and designing? So why aren't we changing the way we design, I'm assuming?
I agree.
Maybe you can have a discussion with Dr. Iman on that.
Yeah.
She's quite
Dr.
passionate.
Iman, thank you very much. Yeah, we've been highlighting this, and that's what I mentioned. It's passive measures, learning from the vernacular. It's where everything starts. So sometimes we move into mechanical cooling and advanced ways, and what you're mentioning is very important to look at it during the design. But to be very realistic, I don't think this is what all clients are looking for. But I think this is where the world is realizing this today, and everyone is coming to this point that you can see a lot the increase of human-centric cities and the importance of creating community social interactions have risen significantly over the past 5 years. So I've been working with this at least for like 15 years, and you can see that the attention is coming there. So I'm hoping that more attention will be given to that particular point.
Matter, inshallah. And by the way, for all members, feel free to step out. I know many of you might be engaged after this workshop, but we're going to maybe linger for 5 more minutes, let's say. We have an inquiry by Abdul Latif. He says, the sudden changes in temperatures, hot versus cold, will not affect the health of people walking through spaces.
It does. Yeah, it does. It does. There are a lot of studies abroad. I haven't seen much in the UAE, but it is causing, I think they are focusing on that recently. But this sudden shift between the indoor and the outdoor is actually causing a lot of health problems. And I think if many of you have younger kids, you can see how much sensitive, because they're more sensitive to these sudden changes. So you would realize with the coughs and everything there, how much it's not only, we're not talking about comfort anymore, but we're talking about it's an essential thing that is related to health measures. So it's a very important aspect.
Thank you. And we have Asil. You can go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Dr. Nihal, for this insightful lecture and the amazing study. I enjoyed it because of many aspects, and mainly because I used to live in Jeddah for the past 25 years of my life. So, just to briefly to introduce myself, I am an architect, but currently working as a senior sustainability consultant at Kendall. I can't agree more on the importance of the findings you conclude with, especially that emphasizes on heat balance between the within the urban space and materiality. However, I would like to highlight an example that I often reflect on, which is Mamshal Alwan, or the Color Walk in Jeddah, as I was one of the main initiative team. This color walk is located right by the sea, which means it's a very humid space with minimal shading, especially during summer. From a microclimatic perspective, it lacks many comfort features, yet surprisingly, people still visit regularly, even on extremely hot days. This made me realize that while climate responsive design strategies are essential, we often underestimate the role of human behavior. People are not always driven by thermal comfort alone. Emotional attachment, culture, routine, and social engagement play a huge role in how spaces are used, even when the physical conditions are not ideal. So, as I worked toward designing user-friendly urban areas previously, I believed it's crucial to complement technical strategies with a deeper understanding of how people actually experience and adapt to space.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping to, I will look at the case study, and I'm hoping to be able to design more of these, as you mentioned. I'm trying to, you know, materialize all these values you're talking about into simulations, so that when your client comes with it, whether he appreciates it or not, you're able to integrate that into the design. So it's other parameters that are needed without having to, convince your clients or call for the public to be able to understand the need or the importance of that, or even show case studies. Well, actually start integrating it straight away. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Please
or
connect with me after the session.
comments?
Yeah. If any other questions, I'd be happy to respond to. I did not put my email. I don't know why, but maybe
You can put
there
it
are.
in the. Can you add it in the chat box?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
can
that's the
add
whole
that in
purpose
the
of this,
chat.
is to have members
Yeah.
connect. And if none of you have any questions,
Where is the chat?
okay, so there is Alex, who said that the best friendly community case study I had chance to experience is in downtown Msherib, I think. I think that maybe that's how we pronounce it, in Doha.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Cool. So if we may step in to take just the last minute, my colleague Baha wants to share a little about our Emirates GBC forum. And then we wish you all an amazing weekend. And just to remind you, this will be recorded and posted on our website for you to check anytime, and feel free to connect with Dr. Nihal at any time. So Baha, you just have maybe a few seconds, a minute or so.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Lana, and thank you very much, Dr. Nihat, for the very insightful workshop. I mean, unfortunately, the workshop is over, but this is why we have built for you the MSGBC forum, so that you can continue discussing any topics you want within green buildings in our forum. And I'm going to leave a quick link over here. We have already sent invitations to all our members. If you haven't received any invitations or you need any support, please feel free to email me on emiratsgvc.org over here. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Baha.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, there's one last comment from Mario.
Yeah.
Any chance you can share a copy of the Jeddah case study document? So I'll be checking with you, Dr. Nihal, after this meeting on whether you can share. No worries. Thank you, everyone.
Sure.
Take care, and we look forward to engaging with you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.